Nadia, let's quickly introduce yourself, please. Tell us briefly about yourself.
Of course, of course. I'm really, really delighted to be here this morning, Martin. Thank you for reaching out and for Rasheen for reaching out to say come and join you guys. You do some fantastic work at Insights Media, and I've always enjoyed our partnerships and our collaborations and the work we've done together. So, to those of you joining, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy days. I know it's the run up to Christmas, so all time is precious. But it's really good to take some time out, isn't it, to learn from each other, which is what we're here to do today. So my name's Nahdia Khan. I have down on my description as senior talent and L&D professional, which probably highlights the fact that I started my career on the practitioner side. So I ran a number of secondments, executive leadership programs, which actually connected people across sectors. So opened me up at a very early stage and quite a long period of time working with some very senior execs across public, private, and voluntary sector. I then, for my sins, went to work as a consultant for one of the big four in their learning business, and then decided I wanted to really understand how we can be more evidence informed and data driven, and joined what used to be called Towards Maturity, and before it was bought by the Emerald Group, to work alongside many of you will know Laura Overton, who set up the benchmark study there. Up until recently, I very recently left Mind Tools, where I was their Chief Impact Officer. And my role was exactly around the area that we're going to talk about today, which was how you can use thought leadership to really help define your brand and your position in what we know is a really challenging, busy market out there. But also just how we can drive success and impact on the customer side as well through thought leadership. So that's a bit about me.
Right, thanks, Nadia. So we're going to, this is what we billed that we would cover. So I don't want to shortchange anyone, but this is more of a chat. So if you've got any questions, then please, put them in the chat. If there's something you would like to take away from today, then just please do share it. We're going to just very quickly look at what we mean by thought leadership, the value and impact. I shared a couple of links in the chat. There's been some interesting research by Edelman, who do some fantastic work around trust and increase. They've been doing thought leadership research for a number of years as well. Interestingly, LinkedIn is now part of that. And also there's a link to FT Longitude. Now, that is an agency that the Financial Times bought, and they basically only do thought leadership campaigns for big brands. So I would definitely have a look at that, because that kind of looks at the value and impact of this. And then we're going to look at the role it can play in building your brand credibility and types of thought leadership to consider. Now, in less than 40 minutes, that's an enormous amount of ground to cover. So we will also share some other stuff after this, but let's try and see if we can get through it. We just got a few slides as prompts as well. So Nadia, put this slide together. Do you want to quickly tell us, I think thought leadership can be a bit of what I would call a Marmite term. It can turn people off, as well as it can be really powerful. So what is it? What do we mean exactly by thought leadership?
You're right, Martin. It's good for you to kind of do that. I think it's one of those things which sounds rather lofty as a term. People think it's thought leadership. It's something bigger than it really needs to be. But essentially, thought leadership is the practice of positioning yourself, your brand, as I explained when I was doing my introduction, or your organization as an authority or expert in a specific area or industry. If you think about how crowded the vendor space is for us in the learning market, but any market, ubiquity is quite normal. There's lots of companies out there that are offering the same products and solutions. So thought leadership is a way of a kind of almost positioning yourself, defining yourself in a slightly different way. And it involves sharing insights, innovative ideas, valuable perspectives, that influence others' thinking and decision making. I think to be a thought leader, you do need to take a bit of a position. So people are recognized for their expertise, their foresight, and their ability to articulate what we call complex concepts in a way that inspires and guides others, unpacks things for people, um, brings out the pain points, brings out some of the challenges that the market is facing in that way. So some of the key elements of when we talk about thought leadership is that we talk about, expertise, so demonstrating deep knowledge and skills in that particular domain. If you are a provider, which is, I'll give a recent example from Mind Tools, focused on developing and building better managers, then your expertise in that area needs to come through in your thought leadership, and vice versa. The thought leadership will help influence how you position your value in the market. I think offering fresh, original insights or approaches that challenge conventional thinking. Again, we see a lot of content out there. LinkedIn is a very crowded space. A lot of people talking about the same things, a lot of statements that are made. But what's often missing, and what good thought leadership does, is bring a fresh, original perspective into that. And I'm sure we'll move on to talk about the different types of thought leadership, but that's where being evidence informed and bringing research and fresh insight into things actually helps you stand out your thought leadership better. I think credibility is really important when it comes to thought leadership. And there is definitely something about being quite deliberate and intentional in these things. So building trust and authority through consistent high quality contributions backed by either, kind of experiential data or results. I think you need to spend quite a bit of time to build that credibility up. You won't just overnight become a thought leader in your area. It does take some time. We're delighted to be joined by what I would call, some thought leaders on our chat today, who, over time they have built up their credibility in the market. And we will talk a bit about, how that can help you even drive your own personal brand later on. Audience centric, so addressing the needs, challenges, and aspirations of your audience and offering them actionable value. One of the things that I found when I took over the thought leadership program at Mind Tools was our reports previously had focused a lot on what the data was telling us, but not necessarily what we should be doing following that. So what were the kind of recommendations or pointers that we were pointing people to and saying, based on what we're seeing in the data and what we're seeing in the insight, these are some of the things that you could be doing next. So I think really trying to build that audience-centric piece and actionable value is really, really important. And then visibility, doing really, really good research and then not amplifying it through the correct platforms. That's a big part of having, a successful thought leadership in my mind, and where thought leadership cuts itself separately to say, the odd blog here or there. It's quite a consistent program in terms of visibility that people want to be able to see.
I think that's quite interesting. Thank you, Nahdia. In terms of so we're talking about, really, we're not talking products and features here, or for personal brand, we're not talking about the day-to-day stuff. This is an opportunity. This is a different approach, right? So I think one might look at it and say, well, it's about investing in something that might give us a return, much further down the line. And yes, the answer is yes to that. You wouldn't stop all your other activity on a daily, monthly basis. But what you would do is start to get known for something. And that's the thing, isn't it? It's what are you going to be known for? What are you going to be the go-to person or brand for this thing? And I think that's kind of what that's getting at, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. I think the challenge here, and it's in the report that you're going to be sharing. You've already referenced, but you will be sharing with participants and others later, is that the value to the business. So one of the challenges around thought leadership is we're not all that good at tracking the value and the benefit to the business. So almost a part of you setting up thought leadership within your organization is being quite clear about what role it plays. So as to your point, Martin, as you say, it doesn't replace other bits of marketing, which you are absolutely going to have to do on the product marketing side in terms of getting your go-to-market out there, in terms of really getting your product proposition out there. It's a supportive element and part of that, and it adds value in the business to not just driving your integrated product strategy or what goes into your product offer, but then also how you amplify it and get it out there. So I think it's in terms of value to the business, what the report talks about is that people kind of know it's doing good, but what often holds it back is that they've not really set the metrics up right at the beginning to say, okay, what does success look like for us in this, and what value is it driving for the business? It may not necessarily mean leads. It may not necessarily, mean direct pound sales, or could do. It really does depend on how you set it up.
Yeah, I think also it can challenge the whole business, because a very sales oriented business will want just results,
Yeah.
and I think this is actually about talking internally about, well, if we're going to stand for something in the market, then what is it we're going to stand for? What is it we want to talk about with confidence? Because basically someone's got to talk about it. So you're going to have to find someone or people in the organization who are prepared to go and be a bit more public about it. So actually, you really do need people on board, don't you? Because it's not, if it's just something that's marketing driven, then it's going to suddenly be self-limiting, when actually you want the whole brand and it to be led visibly in the market. So, and I think there are examples of that, aren't there? So maybe we could come on to that. Okay, sorry.
I was going to just say quickly, and it's one thing that I haven't mentioned here, but just the point that you were saying around what do you stand for, I think it has one part of thought leadership I have seen take effect is the impact it also has on employees in terms of building a bit of an employer brand. Because what it does is make people realize what it is that we stand for. So there is a really strong connection to purpose that thought leadership can drive, which I think sometimes, as I said, if you're quite ubiquitous in the market and we're all selling the kind of similar things, what is it that actually gets you out are some of the problems that we're solving for the market. And that's what thought leadership also, so there's an internal value and a benefit to it as well as an external, obviously, for the business.
Yeah, I think also, thanks, Joe, for sharing that about Gur. He's that idea of trend catching is interesting, actually, because if you actually look across at markets, there are certain people that are doing this, and and if you do it over time consistently, it starts to get noticed. And I think that's something about this, isn't it? It's a longer play. So basically, and it maybe can feel a bit like a slightly lonely thing to be doing at some point, but you're sticking your head above the parapet. And yes, I think that's a great example. So these were a few. I've just shared a couple of bits of research. This is just the reason I thought it'd be useful just to put a couple of bullet points in, is because this stuff does matter. People do actually make decisions about buying and about who to approach around products and services based on this type of content. So I think I'd recommend reading those two bits of research, because there's lots of data points in here, but you can see this. It's kind of talking about reflecting what you've been saying, Nahdia, this idea of this kind of knowledge and expertise building trustworthiness over time, and being perceived as the people that know and can do this stuff. I think that's really interesting. It's quite a lot of perception here. Because at this level, you're not talking about products and services. You're just sharing kind of useful insights, potentially based on data. So it's kind of makes you a lot more credible. They're the things that you were talking about in the last slide, but I think this is reflected in the research. Edelman's research was of 3,500 decision makers, so it's not insignificant either. These are people that are buying. I think one thing I would say, which is quite interesting in a downturn, is the role this can play. So when the economic environment is more challenging, I think people are open to looking beyond the suppliers that they are familiar with. If there is, good thought leadership content, it will catch their eye. And also, I thought it was quite interesting, the last one, and this is, there's hope here for all of us. The idea that if you look good and knowledgeable, you can probably charge more. And I think that's
Yeah.
quite interesting too. I mean, I'm not trying to, I'm being slightly, I don't mean to be making light of that. It's actually really important. But as an investment, it's worth thinking about that, because you are seen as a bit more premium, because you know what you're talking about. So yeah, so that's just a few points there about the value and impact. Anything else you add to that, Nahdia?
I think it's I think you're right. It's what's interesting is, I think, even if you come back to the commercials, Martin, and we talk about that sales cycle now, that sales cycle isn't, if you look at the market and how people are consuming and buying in the L&D space, it isn't necessarily that they want to be contacted by salespeople or customer success or whatever, actually talking to people who understand the challenges of workplace learning. And in many cases, those are people who are quite close to the detail and of the pain points that are happening there. So you can reposition even how you set up those conversations, which are sales driven, in terms of how people access or come through the funnel in your organization in order to talk to an expert.
Yeah.
But if you're selling that expert line of somebody who understands the challenges that are out there, then you have to have backup there around. And that's where thought leadership comes in, because why would someone think you're an expert if you haven't got something solid to be able to fall back on? Because I think, yes, obviously your product's good enough. We were talking about this earlier, weren't we? If your product's good enough, it will sell, and people are interested in the features. But I'm thinking, if coming back to that thing where we have a lot of vendors out there who are selling very similar things, what is going to make them want to come to you is a different dialogue and a different type of conversation, which really understands the challenges that they're facing. When they're having to make some of these decisions, we know that budgets are challenged. We know that, as you say, in economic downturn, and also there was a lot of investment done at the beginning of COVID. People are coming out of agreements that they made during that time. They're looking, the market has shifted and changed. There's lots of new providers out there. They want to understand. So what's going to set you apart from that? I think there's some real value, as you say, not to belittle it, is to really think about where it fits into your go-to-market as well, in that space.
Great. This was really just a few of the kind of beautifully summarized already by yourself, Nahdia. So it's not as if we need to go through this, but also the research backs this too. It's like, what actually, what do people expect from it if you're going to be doing it? And, credible research. And I would add that that research does not need to be primary research. It's a bit like Joe's point about trend catching. Actually, what about the person that's just, and we do this in our work, is pulling together the insight, the data points that are in the market already. There's loads of research that is shared. And actually, how do you package that up for your audience and your narrative? That's basically, you don't have to go and get primary research done. There's plenty of research that you can use there. And then you have that narrative, the insight. Now, so this is the really interesting point from my perspective. The data tells you something is going well or badly, but you don't necessarily know what that is.
Mm,
It's the insight that tells you that. And I think
yeah,
that's what people want to know. They say, well, actually, you might see this, but the reason it's not working is because of X, Y, and Z, and the solution is this, because
yeah,
they also want answers, you know.
yeah,
So I think, you know, but I think it's really important that the research bit doesn't have to be primary research, and it can be customer. You can interview people, you can, you know, talk to peers, you can, whatever it is. Um, but you have to have that foundation, because otherwise you're not going to have the credibility. Is that?
yeah. I agree, and I think you're right. It doesn't have to be primary research. I've experience of both. Obviously, at Mind Tools, we had a very
Mm,
healthy research program, which was run by Dr. Gent Armitage and Dr. Hannah Barnett. So I was very lucky to have two people who could
yeah.
go out and do some of that primary research. What I think is interesting, and I know um, we had started to do this more recently, was triangulating data as well. So looking at our own insight that we were gathering, but also to your point, Martin, what else was being said about those things in those areas, which
Mm,
then allowed you to create that clear and compelling narrative. I just want to pick up on case studies, because this is a really interesting one, and the point that you made about customer insight. This is the one area which I think in the thought leadership space we could do so much more with. And it's quite tricky to get good
yeah.
case studies. But I think investment and time in driving really, really strong evidence that you have made a difference to
Mm,
a customer, um, and but bringing out that through a thought leadership lens is actually quite an interesting way to do it.
mm,
Um, the challenges we have with case studies are that lots of organizations, because they're working with multiple vendors, don't want to give a case
yeah.
study to one particular vendor. But I think you have an opportunity, if you want to be to view it through the thought leadership lens, and to almost say, we want to be able to showcase this as a really strong piece of learning to the broader community, to strike that rather than saying, will you endorse our products and our services? Do you know what I mean?
Mm,
I'm hoping that's making sense what I'm saying.
mm,
So
mm,
you're almost working with the team together to say, let's kind of work on building a bit of an evidence around what was delivered here for you as a customer and the difference it's made through that
yeah.
thought leadership kind of lens. And the way we would had started to think about it in my team was to think, okay, well, if we apply our research methodologies to that, then how do we really
Mm,
drive this? The other thing is, if you go in for quite a number of award type of submissions, it gives you a really good opportunity to kind of build some of
yeah.
that compelling narrative as well.
Yeah.
They're really good, but often we give those submissions in. If we don't win an award, they just go and sit in the top cupboard. But there's a story to tell there,
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
not necessarily telling them. So I think that's important. But your point, Martin, and in my whole time working quite closely with the learning performance benchmark and the insights that we put out there, you're absolutely right that just presenting the data doesn't help anybody. It's the insight and the narrative that you build around it,
Mm,
and what insight and direction you're giving to people around what they do next is where they see the real value.
yeah.
And this is, a bigger issue that we have around how we use data and insights generally. It's not just, I've got my results, I'm going to open my top drawer and put the results in there. It's kind of, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do with this information?
But I think also, I mean, I don't know if we've got anyone um, on from an internal team. And thanks, Caroline. I'll come back to your comment.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing applies if you're in an internal learning team. It's the idea that you can you could choose the narrative. You know, what's the
Yeah.
big strategic vision for the
Mm,
company over the next whatever period? And you might decide that there's one area that you could really lead on,
mm,
and basically talk to people in the organization, get some feedback, get some almost testimonial type stuff. The right kind of quotes from the right kind of people can really help
mm.
make your point, can't they? And they can really demonstrate that you've got your finger on the pulse. You know, you're the go-to person when it comes to, you know, what's happening around this area. You know, and that can work in a personal way as well for your personal brand. But I think it's really interesting because all of this is not just an external facing,
Absolutely right. Yeah.
professionalized process that a marketing team does.
Yeah.
That's not, you know, it's not limited to that. It's
Yeah.
actually, it can be practiced at all levels, can't it?
But it allows you to elevate. I think you're absolutely right, Martin, to bring it back into the internal, because I focused mainly talking about external, and then does internal L&D teams have the opportunity to kind of create that clear and compelling narrative around the work that they're doing for the business. You know, what is it? You know, what are they here for? What do they see their purpose as? And how are they driving that? And we know that this is a big challenge for internal L&D teams, where they're just seen as the people that deliver compliance or take orders or do whatever. You know, how do you elevate that and say we are doing these things because they closely
Mm.
align with the purpose of us as a business, what we're here for, the problems we're solving in the market? And you know, you're absolutely right in that space. There is absolutely not limited to an external audience. It's how do we use that internally as well. I was just going to answer Caroline's question. I think you wanted to say something as well. Are you okay with me going first?
Please do. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, sure. It's absolutely fine, Caroline, to go for qualitative. And I think the value you get from the qualitative, and there are ways in which you can, um, you know, there's lots of information out there, and I'm happy to share it as well afterwards around how to undertake good qualitative research. But essentially, it would, you know, be based around more kind of one-to-one interviews, or focus groups, or you know, that type of thing. So you know, kind of getting people together, as long as you are really clear, as is the case in all of these reports, even if you look at the Edelman report, exactly how you collected that data, and you know, the inference that you're able to take from that. Don't be held back by the fact that it needs to be, you know, just quantitative or just qualitative. I mean, great, mixed. A good data set is often mixed method. But you know, you have to go with what's going to work within your organization. And any insight is better than no insight. So you know, it's just
Mm.
how you position that and how you present it. That's where you've just got to make sure that is the case. But I'm very happy to send across some information on that afterwards as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a great question, Caroline. And I think um, I would add to that that even within, you know, a, a short interview with a customer will
Mm,
give you immense kind of rich feedback. You know, ask the right questions, and also you can put in a couple of, you know, rate this thing 1 to 5 at the end if you need to, because you've already you've done the interview. And if you were to say, what's the impact been on your work using this service, or this, you know, I think that's completely legitimate, as you say, Nigel. It's not, you know, you're not going to
mm,
get a big data set, but what you've got are verbatim comments about how someone or a product or services a company has helped someone. And it's really powerful because we do this in our work, and it's extraordinary what when you ask some open questions about how has this been working for you, where's the impact been, you know, what improvements would you like, you can, you know, you can use the opportunity to ask some other questions that would be also very important for your business. You'll be amazed at what you get back. It's, you know, I think it's a case of just asking the right questions. And as Nadia said, you can mix that up. I think it also really matters who you're asking, because they could be really, really important people to you in your business.
mm,
And their answers could easily get fed back up the chain internally, because actually this very, important person in this customer organization is saying this. And it's like, well, how could you use that within that customer organization to get more traction around what you're doing? And how could you use that? So I think there's, it still takes time. There's the thing with it. I think there's a theme with this whole
Yeah,
thought leadership piece. It's you're kind of investing in it. So you might want to do those interviews, but it might take you 6 months to do a few because people are busy, you know. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing it, because it can really feed back into, how
yeah.
you do what you do.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think about case studies in particular and interviews and these types of things, Caroline, and to others, is that the more you can involve the individuals in the amplification and the success of it, the more likely they are to
Mm,
participate as well. If you can help, almost position the case study or the interview around this is going to help you sell what we've been able to work on together internally as well. I think there's an added kind of advantage in there for them, couched in that kind of thought leadership space. But to Martin's point, it may take you a bit of time to get there, but it doesn't mean it's not important. What it will drive for you in the long term will be, much greater value than a single quote from someone. Not to say that those single quotes kind of aggregated don't also drive things. They all have their places, but I think it's almost, taking some of those deliberate, intentional small steps will give you the confidence to be able to start to see how that builds as a strategy going forward.
um, yeah, and I think Rasheen's point there about
Mm.
just the bringing it to life,
Mm-hmm.
I'd echo that. I think also the understanding of how people talk about value and impact. What words do they use? How do they describe what you do? That's because that can really feed back into your voice, through
Yeah.
your thought leadership. How are you talking? What tone do you take? um, to whom? I think that, I mean, we haven't gone that granular
No, that's
in
an
this
interesting
discussion,
point you make
but
there, Martin. Yeah.
that
Mm.
is that's another thing to consider. But so actually, you know, they feel like they're like the magic porridge pot for me. For anyone that has read that story, long time, it's like you ask these questions, and it's like a gift that gives, and actually gives a lot more than you thought it would give,
Mm.
because you do get a sense of the language that's being used, the value statements that are being used, um, and all sorts of other things that can be really useful. So I'm a big
And
fan of them.
yeah, and I think tone of voice is a really interesting one that you mentioned there, Martin, because if I look at the research program that I was running at Mindtools, where we started and where we've ended up, it's taken us a bit of time to get to that more what I would say authoritative, slightly potentially activist tone of voice to kind
Mm,
of challenge the market a bit and say, you've got to do that. But with that to get to that confidence level, I think you build that slowly, or you decide that that's not what your tone of voice is, right? But I think you
yeah.
do need to probably uh, experiment with that a bit and say, how does that feel to us? How does that align with our general
Mm,
kind of how we are appearing to the market and our brand and our positioning and all of that? Because I think that helps that. But
yeah.
in a funny kind of way, I think thought leadership almost could equally, within a business could be seen as something quite independent, but it feeds in so much into that positioning for you and how you define yourself in the market. So it could
Mm,
help you set your tone of voice because you're actually, and if you are able to drive something which is quite evidence informed, it gives you that confidence to be able to appear quite bullish in the market
yeah.
as well.
I think also, I mean, we haven't picked up on it yet, but I think those and you're about to talk about some of
Mm.
this, but I think that point about case studies or just
Yeah.
even having those interviews means that you might identify people that would advocate for your organization, and they might even want to be a part of your content plan. That could be an event, it could be an
Mm.
online session, it could be any number of things.
Mm.
um,
Yeah.
but actually you can also identify people who could be really useful. um, so what was that, Joe? I've been sideswiped by a comment.
By a compliment.
Oh, look at that. Wow, Joe. I might have to just go and have a lie down. That's incredible. That's made my day. Thank you.
Well, you know, kind of linking into this, Martin, you do have a personal brand and credibility in the market. And I think, you know, again, this is something which it's a really strange thing, isn't it, Martin? I don't know, you know, people are quite rightly when it comes to building your personal brand, you do have to be deliberate. But I think all of us
Mm,
who have a bit of a brand in the market probably didn't realize we had one until we were told we had one. And you know, you're kind of, for the want of a better word, peddling what you think are the things that you are seeing as important out there and requiring insight and commentary on. But the your audience is telling you, I like some of what you're saying. You know, it's
mm,
kind of making sense to me what you're saying. But the value that it can play in personal brand and credibility, I think I've just given you guys some examples of where it can do that. So it really does allow you to demonstrate your deep knowledge and experience and your area of focus. And that can be as broad and as small as you want. You know, you may
yeah.
want to take a workplace learning angle and put a gender slant on it and, you know, be really, really deliberately talking about women in leadership or, you know, that type of thing. Um, uh, uh, you know, it really does depend on how you choose to do that. And differentiating your personal brand, I think all of us know that there are some very, very regular contributors on LinkedIn that talk consistently, and people know them for the types of things that they talk about, you know, and their areas of specialism, but helping you stand out in that very, very crowded market. And if you think about, as I said, even as this from somebody coming into the learning technology space, um, would probably be able to work out through some research and stuff who are the things that people are saying, you know, that are commenting on and where their areas of specialism are, because those individuals have done quite a bit of work in terms of building up that thought leadership and doing it quite consistently. And I think consistency is quite an important thing in this. If you are commenting on things or putting a view out there into the market and you're doing it once a year, um, unless it's a really big piece of research that you're putting out there that you're then hoping to trickle throughout the year, you know, people are going to lose that. You do need to be
Mm,
quite visible, I think, as you're, you know, building up that trust and that credibility. Expanding your network, I think, is a really, really an interesting one, and I think it
yeah.
would be fair to say that for those of us who are kind of know each other, we do know of each other, and this does give you the opportunity. You know, I've reached out over the years and seen people talk about certain things, comment about certain things, and then say, "Can we have a conversation about that? Can we talk about that? Thinking of doing a webinar on this. Would you be able to join me?" So, you know, it definitely opens you up to expanding that network from outside of your area. And I think we were just commenting on this earlier that you know, a piece of news was posted yesterday evening, which was picked up by somebody that was not in our network, and we don't actually quite know how that ended up in there. But you know, you never quite know where your information is going to be picked up and why it is of an area of interest. But it really does give you the opportunity
Mm,
to even step outside of your market and see where some of those similar conversations are having. And then, you know, with that does come the opportunity to drive influence and impact, shape opinions, shape the conversation, and be invited to contribute to journals or reports or speaking at events. And then, of course, we're not going to be in our respective roles wherever we are forever. It does give you an opportunity
Mm.
to both amplify yourself internally within your organization and be seen as the person who kind of you want to talk to and speak to about these things that are kind of important. And I think the collaborative piece is a really interesting one. In taking on the role that I have done in the last kind of couple of years, I was getting pulled into lots of conversations across the business, whether it was product, whether it was sales and marketing, whether it was more deeper kind of driven data work. It definitely gives you an opportunity to not be siloed into something as well. And of course, building long-term legacy. I mean, I would argue our legacies are much greater than our roles and the jobs that we do. But in terms of if we look at it just professionally, it definitely highlights both you and your organization as individuals and organizations that are interested in the collaborative effort that goes into putting out good thought leadership out there, and the dialogue and the discussion and the debate that you want to inform the market does set you out, set you aside slightly from individuals who are just looking to push their products all of the time.
That's great, Nadia. Now, I make it that it's in UK time. It's 11:45, so I'm always like to keep things, as much to time as possible. So I don't know if there's any. I mean, we've had a couple of questions and comments, obviously. So is there anything else that anyone? Yeah, Helmer, it wasn't ever coffee for you, was it? I've got to remind myself not to just brand it as a coffee session and it's lunch for everyone else, schoolboy error. If anyone's got anything that they would like us to, anything else, like us, you got any questions or anything? I mean, the only thing I would just finally say in terms of how to do it, I think we've kind of gone through some of that, but I think it's you know understanding your audience, isn't it? What matters to them? What matters to your business? What's the thing? You can look at your competitors, what's the vision for the business, and then just kind of pulling all this together, and then getting some credible research around it, which you will find in the market or have through the conversations, and then you can start to feed that out, can't you? That can be in written stuff, it could be podcasts, it could be events, but basically it's all the work, I think, goes in at the beginning. It's really sort of, because I think probably most people know how to do the channels, how to deliver stuff, but I think it's the thinking that we've been talking about today really that is at the heart of it, isn't it? Because you want to be standing out is what ultimately we're saying.
Yeah, I think also, Martin, just coming back to the report that you're going to share, you've shared with everyone on the end of the report, really does help individuals who are trying to build a bit of a business case internally for this. Because I think, you and I know this, thought leadership is thrown out. We need to do more thought leadership. But is the business going to support it? Are your stakeholders going to support it? You can't just do good thought leadership either internally as an L&D team or externally out into the market without the support of your product team, without the support of your sales and marketing team, and without a real understanding of where it fits in. Otherwise the benefits become quite diffuse. It's one of those things we'll get to when we get to it type of thing, as opposed to really, is there the appetite and the desire and the investment in the business to put some time and effort behind this, and the recognition that we've mentioned a couple of times that it will take, we won't get it right the first time. It takes a number of years for you to, and as I said, there are vendors out there are L&D teams out there who have been doing this for a while. They've always had an eye to that, and they are in a slightly more fortuitous position because they already have that reputation. But I think there is definitely some work around the stakeholder piece that you probably need to do in terms of, the channels are quite straightforward, as you say, in terms of where you deliver it and how you deliver it. But I think it's really just making sure that you have the buy-in internally to be able to support it. Otherwise, it can feel like a bit of a, a lone pursuit if you're not
Yeah.
careful or you're not set it up correctly.